Hey everybody, this is Russ from Retro Game Core. Today I'm excited to show off a new operating system for the Miyoo Mini. And this was put together by a team of contributors from the retro handheld community. And it is called Onion. And this is an all-in-one solution that allows you to have an upgraded list of emulators, additional pre-configurations, a streamlined folder structure and user interface, as well as some pretty neat functions too. And so in this video, I'm going to give you a full installation guide and then also walk you through some of these new features. And to me, this is a pretty exciting development because it fixes a lot of the issues that I had with this device when it first launched. But of course, we'll talk about that more later in this video. So without any further delay, let's jump into it. Okay, now to start, we need to have the most upgraded version of the Miyoo Mini firmware first. And so let's do that now. First thing you want to do is remove your SD card and put it into your computer, and then head over to the Miyoo Mini page, which I'll have in the written guide linked in the video description, and then grab the most recently released software update file. As of making this video, the most recent file is from January 8th. And so we're going to want to have two folder windows open here. The first one is going to be our actual SD card on the right, and then the left is going to have our firmware update file. So next, let's go ahead and extract that firmware file, and within that you can find two folders here. Now there's going to be a firmware folder. Inside there you'll find a firmware file. What you want to do is move that over to the root section of your SD card. Next there's going to be a TF card folder, and within that there are three different subfolders. What you want to do is move all three of these folders onto the SD card as well. Now as you move it over, it's going to ask you if you want to replace some of the files. And at this point you want to say, yeah man, I want to replace it. Okay, and that's it in terms of updating the stock firmware. Let's go ahead and eject the SD card and put it back into our device. Now, a few different things you have to do here. Number one, put the SD card back into your device. And then number two, you need to remove the battery. We're actually going to plug this into a wall charger to give it a very stable signal. The thing is, if your battery happens to die during this update, you can actually brick the device. And so we're going to avoid that at all costs and just plug it directly in. Now this needs to be plugged in with just your basic phone charger. A 5 volt 1 amp would be great. And it also needs to be a USB-A to USB-C cable. Anyway, as soon as you plug this in, it's going to start up the device and initiate the system upgrade procedure. And this is going to take a couple minutes to run through, and I recommend do not touch your device at all. Now I get it, I just touched the device, but you don't do it. I just needed to touch it to make it look a little bit better on the screen. Anyway, don't touch your device. Once it's done, it's going to reset itself, and then you'll get an icon that shows charging. After that, we're good to go. The last thing to do is to add the battery and then remove the SD card because we need to take that firmware file out of the root directory. So back on your PC, you're going to find that firmware image file and then just delete it. And simple as that, we are now ready to rock. Now before we get into the installation of Onion, let me show you some of the things they've added to the new firmware image just so you can get an idea of the work that Miyoo has been doing behind the scenes. First thing you're going to notice, they have a new user interface that has a much clearer and sharper design to it. And they also have some fresh new icons. Everything looks pretty good. Now when you open up a game, like for example Chrono Trigger here on the Super Nintendo, you can see here it's still using those standalone emulators, and a lot of these have not been optimized for the device. So that unfortunately has not been fixed. But of course you can also go onto the RetroArch side and you can open up a specific core and then play your game that way as well. And I've never really liked the fact that you have to go into two different folders to find two different emulators to run the same game. And so in that sense, Miyoo has not fixed that experience. But it does look like they have fixed RetroArch in some ways. For example, if we change the aspect ratio to 8:7 instead of 4:3, as you can see here, it shows the 8:7 aspect. Previously, this didn't work at all. That being said, they still have some issues with their scaling. As you can see here, it's still a little bit fuzzy looking. Now probably the most important change they've done is they've added a color settings into the settings menu here. And within here you can adjust things like illumination, hue, saturation, and contrast. Now the numbers seem to vary in terms of results, so I don't want to give any specific numbers that are going to work out the best, but I do encourage you to mess around with these and see which one works best for your specific use case. Anyway, I think I've seen enough of the stock operating system. Let's now dive into the Onion side of things. Now in my written guide, I'm going to walk you through all these steps here, but at the end of the day, your best place to go is going to be the Onion Wiki, which I'll have linked in my written guide. So what you'll want to do is you'll want to go to the releases page and then download the most recent version of the release. Now I'm working on this video before the newest one is out, but it'll be out by the time this video drops. And so just download the most recent release, which is the one I have here, and then just go ahead and extract this zip file. It's going to give you one single folder called app, and that's actually all you really need. Now for this, I actually recommend using a blank SD card. You can pick any old SD card. I'm using a 32 gig one that I have that I think would be a really good fit for this machine. and then we need to format it to FAT32. We're going to use a program called GUI Format to do that. And within here, all you have to do is make sure you pick the drive letter that corresponds to your SD card, as you can see here, 32 gigs. And if you look at the card, you can see because it's 32 gigs and below, it's already going to be FAT32 formatted. But if you use anything bigger than 32 gigs, it won't be, so you'll have to run this program. Either way, I'm just going to run it to make things easier on us. And so now I have a freshly formatted FAT32 SD card. And here we go with the installation of OnionOS. You simply just drag this app folder onto the SD card. And that's all you have to do for installation. Now let's eject the SD card and put it into our device. Now when it first boots up, you'll get that old user interface, don't even worry about it, but go into the settings options and then make sure that Hibernate is set to never. And that's just to make sure it doesn't fall asleep while you're installing Onion operating system. Next, go ahead and plug in your charger so that way the battery doesn't die during the installation again. And we're going to go into App, and then there's the Onion installer. Just go ahead and press A, and then same thing here, just kind of leave it and don't really touch anything. It's going to take upwards of 15-20 minutes for the very first install. For me, altogether, it only took about 5 minutes. Anyway, once it's done, it's going to shut itself off and you'll get that charging logo again. And now we're ready to rock, so let's unplug it and turn the device on. And okay, so now at first glance, it does look very similar to what we already saw with the previous operating system. We have recents, favorites, consoles, and then the app section. But as you'll see here, there is no RetroArch section. Everything has now been built into one single user interface, and I really love this. And from the get-go, it's going to show you all the systems you have available. There's something like 48 of them already built in, and they are sorted by the year of release of that system. So for example, in 1994, Super Game Boy came out, and that's why you see it here. And so that's kind of a neat way to navigate through your games. It's kind of like walking through a museum. Now, over on the app section, it's much more robust. They have all sorts of user and community created apps here. One of my favorites is the cartridge one. We'll go over that later. It also has the ability to have an expert view. I'll show you that later too, as well as the ability to set the real-time clock on the device or to refresh your ROM databases in case you have any sort of errors. And then there's also a manual built in, so you can just go into this and read a little bit about the Onion operating system. And probably most importantly, it has a listing of all the shortcuts available within the system. For the most part, the menu key is going to be your hotkey, and the ones I would say pay the most attention to is menu plus start is going to be how to quit a game, and then menu plus select is going to be your toggle to get into the actual menu of the emulator. But yeah, that's the manual in a nutshell, and I expect this will probably get updated as time marches on too. Additionally, within the app section, you have the ability to just jump directly into RetroArch in case you want to make some system level configurations, but a lot of these have already been pre-configured for you, and I'll show you that here in a minute too. And then finally, the other thing I want to show off is this is where you can change your themes right here on the fly. Now it only comes packed with 2 different themes, and anytime you change a theme, it's going to actually power off the device. So if we switch over to Onion Boy here, the device will turn off and then we have to turn it back on. But yeah, this is what Onion Boy looks like. This one's a lot of fun, and the coloring obviously is very nostalgic. And it's a nice mixture of like vintage green and like modern retro. But for now, we'll just go back to that purple one because this one's a little bit easier on the eyes. And by the way, if you go into the settings section, you can see you have all those same settings that were there before. Okay, so now let's start adding some games and BIOS files and everything else to the actual system. So let's plug the card back in, and as you can see here, it has a much more streamlined folder structure. Things like your BIOS and ROMs are all very easy to access now. So let's start by adding our BIOS files. Now in the written guide, I'm going to have a link that'll show you all the necessary BIOS one by one, but another thing you can do is just grab them off your stock SD card. To find them, it'll be in the RetroArch, then .RetroArch folder, and then under System. Now, in order to see the .RetroArch folder, you're going to have to enable the ability to see hidden files within your File Explorer. But after that, you can just grab all these system files here and then move them over into your new BIOS folder on that new SD card. And if you do that, it's going to ask you to replace some of the files. And it's really just talking about some of these ScumVM system files, so I would just skip those. You don't really have to move those over. So yeah, that's about it for BIOS. You can either move your own over, or you can just grab them off the stock SD card. Now, just some other orientation. There's an EMU folder, and within here it has each of the emulator configuration files. We're actually going to mess with those later on in this video. And there's also an images folder, which is separated by different systems. And all you have to do here is just drop your images in. They need to be 256 pixels by width, and they have to match the name of your ROM. Speaking of which, let's go into the ROM folder here, and this is where we're going to actually put our game files. And this process is pretty self-explanatory, but a couple things to note here is that a lot of the naming conventions are based off of the Japanese names. So for example, instead of an NES folder, it's an FC folder for Famicom. So I'm just going to grab a collection of NES games and then move them over into this Famicom folder. And that's about it, but I would recommend that you keep your game lists to be relatively short. You don't want to throw on 6,000 games onto this system. Instead, I would recommend keeping it around 20 to 50 per system. In general, the little Miyoo Mini just doesn't do very well with large ROM libraries. Now, on the Onion wiki page, they have an emulators and ports section here, and within here you can go and pick any system, and then you can find the corresponding ROM folder, as well as any of the file extensions that are supported by that emulator, and then any sort of notes. For example, with Pico 8, they mentioned that the RetroArch core is just very much in its infancy, and so newer carts usually do not work. But yeah, this is where I recommend going if you want to add a specific game, you want to make sure that you're using the right file system, and you want to check whether or not you have the correct BIOS. All of that information is going to be on the wiki page, which again will be linked in the written guide. Okay, so one of the things about the Onion operating system is that it shows all the emulators right there on the front. And personally, I'm not going to use all of these emulators. For example, I'm not the kind of person who plays a lot of Intellivision. And so what you can do here is go back to the root of your SD card and then make a new folder. You can call it whatever you want. I'm going to call mine No Thanks. Then go into your EMU folder and then grab all the emulator folders for those systems that you don't plan on using. And what you can do is hold down the control button if you're using Windows and then just pick them one at a time. If you're on the Mac, you can do the exact same thing, but you press the command button instead. Anyway, once you've got all those, hit Control X to cut, then go into the No Thanks folder and hit Control V to paste. And that's going to move all of them from the EMU folder over onto the No Thanks folder. And so that'll effectively hide them within the user interface. Now on top of that, there's an entire theme repository within the Onion wiki. So let's go in here and grab a few of these too. I'm just going to grab some at random. And it's super easy to grab these. All you have to do is just click on the picture and it's going to be linked to a zip file. So I'm going to grab this one called Switch here on the bottom left, this other one called Business, and this other one called Galaxy. Now all you have to do here is just unzip each of these folders. You can do it all at once or one at a time. It's really going to be up to you. And then just move those theme folders over into the apps folder on your SD card. And that's it. That's how you install new themes. Okay, so now we're ready to rock. Just as a quick summary here, we moved over our BIOS files, we moved some of the emulators out of the EMU folder, you can add the images if you'd like, then we added all of our ROMs, and then we also installed a few extra themes. So in a nutshell, that's the configuration you can do in Onion. So let's eject the SD card and put it in our device and see how everything looks. Okay, so first things first, I'm going to go into the console section, and yeah, as you can see here, I've whittled it down to just 14 systems. And these are all my favorites here, and obviously you're probably going to have your own personal favorites, but that's how it goes. So let's navigate over to the Game Boy section and try out a game. Now opening it up here, a couple things you're going to notice. Number one, it has the correct aspect ratio here on the sides. It also has the original Game Boy boot logo because we have the BIOS installed, and it has this nice Game Boy DMG colorization to it. And it's kind of funny, it feels a lot like a mini Game Boy at this point. You have the colorization, you have the old smoky gray look for the Game Boy itself. It's just a really nice combination. Now if you'd prefer a 4:3 aspect ratio, very easy. You would just go into the RetroArch menu by pressing Menu and Select, and then make the changes in there. But let's move forward, let's try some other systems. For example, here's Game Gear, and this is running at a native 4:3 as well, and it looks fantastic. Game Boy Advance runs at 3:2 aspect ratio, and the scaling on this also looks very nice. And I don't know, maybe it's just me, but NES to me looks the very best on this system. I don't know why, but it just seems to be very nice and sharp. And I think maybe the 2.8-inch screen just seems to be a really good fit for the font sizes they used at this particular era. Either way, playing NES on this is a ton of fun. And the picture looks really great. Let's do a quick comparison with the RG280V. Now the Miyoo Mini has a much better resolution at 640 by 480, and I think it really shows in a side-by-side comparison. On top of that, the color balance just seems to be a lot better on the Miyoo Mini. And additionally, the saturation, now that you can adjust it, looks a lot better too. Okay, moving along, here Sega Genesis also looks fantastic on this little screen. And one other neat feature they have implemented here is autosaves and auto loads. So if you hit menu and start to exit out of a game, and then the next time you open up the game, it's going to auto-load that save state that it made when you closed out of the game. So that's super great for pick up and play gameplay. And of course, we also have Sega CD. Man, this boot logo just makes me full of so much nostalgia. And the games here run perfectly fine as well. And of course, Sega 32X also runs perfectly on this. I didn't capture any footage, but it runs at full speed, no problem. Additionally, you can play TurboGrafx 16 or CD or PC Engine, however you want to call it. All these run really well too. Okay, let's spend a minute talking about Super Nintendo for a second here, and that's because not every Super Nintendo game is going to run at full speed. For example, Mario World 2 Yoshi's Island does have some stuttering even in the title screen. And this is a good time to talk about the expert menu, which you can enable in the app settings. Now this is basically the equivalent of how you were able to have a RetroArch section on the original Miyoo Mini firmware. And so within here, it has a listing of dozens of different cores. I think there's something like 68 or 70 of these altogether. And so while the emulators that are pre-configured in the console section are the most optimized one for your system, if you want, you can go in here and test out some others. For example, there are 7 different ways to play Super Nintendo. Now, unfortunately, I tested all of them and they all have that same slowdown issue. In general, I just don't think this system's going to be able to play that top 1% of Super Nintendo games flawlessly. But in full disclosure, they also don't run on the Anbernic RG280V perfectly. For example, the standalone SNES emulator here does not run it perfectly. We're getting 49 frames per second. And same thing with RetroArch on the 280V with the Atom image, only 48 frames as well. Now that being said, the other 99% of Super Nintendo games are going to play just fine. And so it's really going to be up to you whether or not that makes or breaks your purchase. For me personally, I have many other ways to play Yoshi's Island, so it's not going to kill me. Now, much like with Nintendo, the screen looks a lot sharper now and everything seems to be balanced in terms of pixels too. And again, a comparison with the 280V screen, I do like the Miyoo Mini one much better. The saturation now seems to be better, and then the color balance also seems to be more accurate too. And on top of that, just the overall image looks a lot sharper and nicer. Now, I'm thinking about doing a dedicated 280V versus Miyoo Mini video. Let me know in the comments below if you're interested in seeing that. But let me just touch on one thing that did bother me a lot about the Miyoo Mini, and that's just how quickly you can navigate through the system. And unfortunately, while Onion makes a lot of great improvements to the overall interface, unfortunately, it's still kind of hard to navigate. For example, if you push down quickly on the menu here, it's actually going to stall and not work perfectly. What you have to do instead is change your cadence so that you push it down kind of slowly. On the opposite side with the Atom firmware image here, you can actually go as fast as your fingers will let you go. And that little difference when it comes to navigating the menus, plus being able to see the artwork as you navigate here, does mean a lot to me when it comes to user interface. Anyway, we'll talk about that more later. Let me know in the comments below if you're interested in hearing about that. Let's move on to emulation. Now, PlayStation 1 actually runs surprisingly well on this now. What they've done here is they've optimized the PCSX rearmed core, so now everything just seems to look a little bit smoother. And on top of that, I found that a specific BIOS file seems to work better than the others. I'll leave it up here on screen so you can grab it if you want. And I'll also mention it in the written guide down below. But as you can see, Tekken 3 is running at full speed. That's a great sign when it comes to PlayStation 1 emulation. In general, I would say this is going to be a very capable PlayStation 1 emulation machine. Moving forward, let's talk about arcade, because this is something that's kind of important to me with these little devices too. In general, this seems to work best with the Final Burn Alpha 2012 core, so I recommend using a corresponding ROM set for that as well. That's going to work for your Neo Geo games as well as your classic arcade games. There is an ability to run MAME 2003 Plus, but I found it wasn't as performant as it was with Final Burn Alpha 2012. So just stick with that ROM set and find your favorite classic arcade games and just have at it. And surprisingly, CPS3 games, things like Street Fighter 3 or Red Earth, they actually play at almost full speed. I would say this is about 90% full speed. You're going to get some audio crackling, but it's pretty impressive that this runs at all. But in general, I would just recommend sticking with the classics and don't worry too much about performance. Okay, let me show off a couple other systems that did seem to have problems when I was testing. For example, Scum VM wasn't as good as I was hoping it would be. And it's kind of a shame because on the RG280V, these run perfectly. Unfortunately, these have audio crackling and stuttering issues. And then finally, I got kind of excited when I saw that Pico 8 was an available system in here. But as I mentioned before, this is running off a very early release of the RetroArch core. And so some games play okay. For example, Celeste does boot, but it does have some stuttering and audio issues. And then some of the more recent Pico 8 releases, for example, Scrap Boy, it doesn't even boot at all. And surprisingly, the game that I made last year over a weekend with my son as a challenge, which is called Bear Me, by the way, about a bear named Jeremy in the army. Anyway, this one doesn't really work at all. For example, his legs don't animate correctly, and then the level ends about 10% of the way into it. So unfortunately, I would just say don't count on Pico 8 on this device just yet. Okay, we've been showing off emulation performance for a while now. We're like 20 minutes into it at this point. So you know what time it is. Let's take a quick cat break. So like I mentioned before, the only other video that I have planned for the Miyoo Mini is going to be a comparison with the 280V. But if there are other things you'd like to see with this device, for example some long plays, or maybe some more setup guides, then let me know in the comments below, because I'm kind of curious to see what you guys would find interesting. Okay, that's enough for a cat break. Now let's do some tweaks in the settings within Onion. Now, first thing here, there used to be an auto shutdown option in the apps, but I believe they've removed that with the most recent release, so we're not going to worry about that one. Instead, let's talk about the cartridge function here. Now, essentially, this allows you to turn any game into a single game machine. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to open up Link's Awakening on the Game Boy Color, and it runs great, by the way. But anyway, as you close down your game, you're going to find that it's going to actually shut down your system too. And then, once you turn the console back on, it's going to automatically start up Link's Awakening again. So this is going to be a really handy tool if you just want to focus on one game at a time. And I think these little devices, like the Miyoo Mini and the 280V, they're just tailor-made for this kind of experience, where you choose one game and then it becomes that console for that game. And then as you complete that game, you can move on to the next one. And I don't know why, but I think these little systems just are better suited for that more focused approach. Anyway, if you want to get out of the cartridge mode, all you have to do is just turn off the game and then press the menu button to cancel instead. Either way, I just really kind of like that new feature. Okay, a couple more things to show off. First, let's test out these 3 themes that I installed. And like I mentioned, you're just going to find them in the app folder here. This one is the business one. I do like the red and gray kind of motif to it. It reminds me of an old NES. And then this one here is the Galaxy one. This one's out of this world. Now, by the way, if you go into settings, you can find the background music volume, and you can even turn it down to 0 to turn it off altogether. Anyway, that's where you would find it in the settings. And then finally, here is the Switch one. And I really like this one. It just has a very simple and clean menu to it. And so honestly, this is the one I've primarily been using with my device right now. Anyway, those are some of the theme options you have, and I encourage you to explore those too. Now, last thing I want to do is show you how to change the display name in the console menu itself. If you go back onto your SD card and then in the emus folder, and then open up an individual system, within here you'll find a label line. And all you have to do is just change the name here and then save that file. So for example, for Genesis, I'm going to change it from 1988 Gen to just the word Genesis. This will also change the sorting order of your systems as well. So essentially, by taking out the dates, I'm turning everything into alphabetical order. And so once you've gone through and updated all the names, this is what it's going to look like. And to me, I just like this a little bit better. I like the alphabetic nature to it. And these are the 16 systems that I ended up settling on, which gives me 2 pages of systems altogether. Anyway, that's just a peek at the customization that you can do on your device if you'd like. Alright everyone, that's about it for this video. Last note here, this device is about the exact same size as a deck of playing cards. And so you can get a case like this one here, which is made for playing cards, and it works perfectly for the device. And I think this is a great combination. This has a faux leather to it, no animals were harmed in making it, and then we have this beautiful Onion operating system inside. And yeah, I'm kind of enamored with this Onion operating system. And so far, we've seen quite a lot of different community solutions. For example, Taki Udon made his own custom skin for this device as well, which you can find on his YouTube page, and I think there's a couple others in the works as well. All the same, I'm really excited about OnionOS because it really streamlines the experience and also allows you to focus the experience down on just one game at a time too. On top of that, there's a bunch of people involved with it, so I expect to see lots of new themes coming in the future, and they're already talking about the next update they're going to work on here soon. So, in general, I think the combination of the new Miyoo Mini stock firmware update, which allows you to change the saturation, and then this new Onion operating system, which has features like the single game cartridge feature, as well as autosave and auto load, I think altogether, it makes this device a much more compelling buy. Now, stock is still kind of low on this device, so you may have to pre-order to get the next batch, but all the same, at the retail price of $50, this is quite a steal. Anyway, let me know what you think in the comments below, and I hope that you enjoyed this video. And like I said before, make sure you check out that written guide in the video description. It'll walk you through all of this at your own pace. As always, thanks for watching, and be sure to like and subscribe if you found this helpful, and we will see you next time. Happy gaming.